Hé, ChatGPT, végül is melyik technológia okozza majd az emberiség vesztét? Szerintem a mensi naptárappok. 5 liter ecetes uborkába és egy üveg pálinkába fogadok, hogy az online menstruációs naptárak lesznek a befutó. Sziasztok, és üdv a középidőben! Ez egy osztrák-magyar produkció és az új kedvenc beszélgetős műsorotok, ahol európai ügyekről van szó, meg arról, hogy mire kellene jobban ügyelnie Európának. Én Papréka Kinga vagyok, a vendégeim pedig válogatott művészek, kutatók, újságírók és szakemberek Európa minden sarkából. Minden második csütörtökön jelentkezünk új adással, úgyhogy iratkozzatok fel most, a jobb alsó sarokban lévő gombra kattintva, válasszátok ki a kis csengőikont, és emellé meg állítsatok be 10-17 további emlékeztetőt, hogy véletlenül sem maradjatok le egyetlen adásról sem. Az internetek az emberiség egyik legnagyobb találmánya, olyan lenyűgöző technológiai áttörések mellett, mint az EKE, a vízöblítéses WC, a demokrácia, meg akármi is legyen ez itt. Nem tudom mi ez, de kell. Annyi információhoz és összeköttetéshez férünk hozzá, amiről a korábbi korok emberei álmodni sem mertek, és lehet, hogy jobban is tették. A világszéles háló ugyanis minden előnye dacára elbutít, elrontja a kedvünket és adósságspirálba taszít minket. Hát ezért konspiráltak évszázadokon át a könyvtárosok, és dolgozták ki a hivatkozási rendszereket és az univerzális hozzáférés elvét? Ezért? De mi lett azzal a digitális tündérmesével, amit gyerekkoromban vasárnap délutáni riportműsorokban ajánlottak a Kossuth Rádión? Akkor még azt mondták, hogy a világháló segítségével egyre tájékozottabbak, megértőbbek és nyitottabbak leszünk. Ehhez képest már a gyerekeket terrorizálunk az Instagramon, meg... Hé te, nem merész egy pornót nézni a másik képernyőn, ha hozzád beszélek? Lényeg a lényeg, a digitalizáció a feje tetejére állította a világot, és nem csak a jó értelemben. Ez a változás az életünk minden területét érinti. Minden korábban érvényesnek hitt jelentés, meg megszokás átalakul. Tulajdonképpen olyan, mint egy új ipari forradalom, csak digitálisan, és hát pont úgy, mint a régi ipari forradalomban, a kapitalizmus most is ránk vert egy kört. Sebastian Bazin, az Akkord hotellánc vezérigazgatója szerint ez nem csak egy átalakulás, ez egy mutáció. Ő itt a Booking.com-ról beszél, de az általa leírt tendencia minden más iparágat is érint a bolygón. A legnyilvánvalóbb, és hát a legelriasztóbb példa erre az Amazon, napjaink legnagyobb online kereskedelmi platformja. A kényelem luxusa az érme egyik oldala. Ettől elválaszthatatlan, hogy a túloldalon az Amazon brutális eszközökkel, például mesterséges árszabással szántja be a konkurenciát, hogy monopólhelyzetbe kerüljön minél több részpiacon. Azért tudják alacsonyan tartani az áraikat, mert rettenetesen alul fizetik a munkásokat, akiknek többsége iszonyatos munkakörülmények között dolgozik, bár, szó se róla, ebben az európai szabályozás szigorúbb, mint például az Egyesült Államokban. A híradások szerint a szakszervezeti törekvéseket is igyekeznek eltiporni, a megnövekedett szállítási mennyiség óriási kibocsátással jár, és egy csomó többlet-szemetet is termel, és ezek csak néhány a sok-sok etikai, gazdasági és ökológiai kérdés közül. Az Amazon egyike az 5 legnagyobb informatikai vállalatnak az Apple, a Meta, a Microsoft és az Alphabet mellett, ez utóbbi a Google anyavállalata. De hogy lett a világinternetekből ez a rémregény? Hogyan jutottunk hobbibloggerek és önsegítő fórumok mezitlábas sufni tunangjától a mai Big Tech őrületig? Maga a Big Tech, mint kifejezés 2013 körül kapott lábra, akkoriban már közgazdászok arra figyelmeztettek, hogy a túllaza szabályozás jelentős hatalomkoncentrációhoz vezethet a digitális piacokon. A 2007-2008-as pénzügyi válságban ugyanis, amikor a hagyományos üzleti modellek megrendültek, a digitális kereskedelem és reklámipar véres kézzel gyarmatosította ezeket a területeket az éppen felnövő ezredfordulós generáció körében. Szevasztok, rendszerváltás után felnőttek. A Big Tech kifejezés aztán egészen új baljóslatú felhangot kapott a 2016-os amerikai választások idején, amikor illegális orosz beavatkozásra derült fény. Több millió felhasználó adataiból kereskedtek közösségi médiaplatformok, amit aztán a rosszhiszemű vásárlók a választók célzott befolyásolására használtak fel. A legnagyobb tech cégek gazdasági és politikai befolyása ekkorra messze túlnőtte az elődeiét is. De ki az, aki ezt a hatalmat gyakorolja? Na jó, hát Mark Zuckerberg nem egymagában tartja kezében a digitalizációt, de ő a világ 4. leggazdagabb embere, a Facebook és a Meta társalapítója, ebbe a csoportba tartozik például az Instagram és a WhatsApp is. A cukorsüveges ember az egyik kulcs szereplő ebben a játékban, a többiek pedig Tim Cook, az Apple vezérigazgatója, Satya Nadella, a Microsofté, Sundar Pichai, az Alphabeté, és Andy Jassy, az Amazoné. Micsoda virsliparádé! Szabolcs már Bereg megyéig érezni a pálott tesztoszteron szagot? Ha neked lenne tech céged, te hogyan próbálnád meg uralni a piacot? Írd meg hozzászólásban. Én már tudom, hogy én mit tennék. Gyerekmegfigyelő szoftvert forgalmaznék, ami megvonja a pulyáktól a képernyőidőt, ha széjjel hagyják a szennyesedényt, a koszos ruhád, vagy nem viszik le a szemetet. A prémium verzió semmire kellő gazdag vakarcsoknak litániázna arról, hogy fogalmat sincs, milyen jó dolgod van, amikor panaszkodni mer az alapvető házi munkára. Az lenne az applikációm neve, hogy anyád. De ellentétben az én agresszív, progresszív pedagógiai vállalkozásommal a ma uralkodó tech cégek üzleti modellje a figyelem gyarmatosításán és a függőségek kialakításán, meg ugye az adataiddal való kufárkodáson alapszik. A figyelem a legdrágább valuta. Én csak tudom, középső gyerek vagyok, egész gyerekkoromban azért versengtem, hogy valaki tudomást vegyen a létezésemről. Persze, amióta megláttak a tévében, a családtagjaim még azt is megbocsátották, hogy balkezes vagyok. Talán a tech cégeknek is inkább terápiába kéne járniuk. Ehelyett viszont pszichológusok dolgoznak nekik azon, hogy a felhasználókat manipulálják, és nem csak ők. Mivel az okos eszközeinket mindenhová magunkkal hurcoljuk, a politikai célú visszaéléseknek se szeri, se száma. Akinek elég hatalma van hozzá, számolatlanul figyelhet meg minket bármilyen helyzetben. Jó napot, Rogán úr! Fontos különbség ugyanakkor az Egyesült Államok és az Európai Unió között, hogy az USA régóta vonakodik alaposan szabályozni a digitális üzletet. A 90-es években ez a hozzáállás még arra szolgált, hogy az új iparág növekedését ösztönözze, mára viszont bénító hiányossággá vált. Az EU ezzel szemben élen jár az ügyfélvédelem, az adat- és biztonsági szabályozás terén, és az idén kezdődött parlamenti ciklusban sok képviselő reméli, hogy alaposabban bele tudnak majd avatkozni a digitális politika területébe. Elslattyogtam hát Brüsszelbe, hogy lekapjak a körméről pár Európa parlamenti képviselőt, és csatlakozott hozzánk egy digitális stratéga is. A parlament saját stúdiójában, sötét pincében bujkáló ellenforradalmár módjára faggattam őket. Christian Ehler, német politikus, 2004 óta az Európa Parlament képviselője és az Európai Néppárt színeiben szolgál, 2022 óta pedig a parlament STOA nevű, a tudományos technológia jövőjével foglalkozó testületének is a feje. Nem tűnik azonban túl sztoikusnak a Big Tech-kel szemben, ő hívott meg minket a parlamentbe beszélgetni. Ilyet se gyakran látnak Magyarországon, hogy konzervatív politikus elébe megy a kérdésnek. Karen Melchior dán politikus, aki 2019 és 2024 között az Európa Parlament képviselője volt, idén köszönt le. Az EP-ben a harmadik legnagyobb képviselőcsoportban, a Megújuló Európában tevékenykedett. Alice Stolmaier, a Defend Democracy alapítója és ügyvezető igazgatója. Korábban politikai tanácsadó és digitális stratéga volt, most a demokrácia, a technológia és az éles hatalom, más néven a hibrid fenyegetések témakörében dolgozik.
Thank you so much for coming. Very welcome. We're here in pretty much the basement of one of the buildings of the European Parliament in Brussels, which I much appreciate. This is why I had to dress up like a human, but I did manage to lose my jacket on the way, so thankfully I'm not overclad. Today we are here to talk about how the European public sphere is transforming, whether there is even a European public sphere per se in a shape that we would like to see it. Where is this digital transformation of the public sphere generally headed? What does it do to democracy, and what can democracy do about this?
I mean, we've seen a fragmentation of the public conversation, not just across Europe, but in every country, in every city. You no longer talk about the same things when you go to the supermarket because you don't talk to people in the supermarket, you're looking at your phone. And I think it's very important that we get to know each other in a more physical way, in a more geographically local way. This sort of geographical community, rather than just a digital one, which is fragmented by the digital platforms.
So you are advocating that we need the conventional methods of community organization, and the promise of the early 2000s that the internet is going to replace these all did not come true, right?
With the monetization of the platforms, which needed advertisement, and the advertisement needed targeting, and you could target very specific groups that didn't have to do with where you lived. That meant that we don't see the same things, and that the platforms became very irresponsible in what they were feeding us. I'm hoping that with the new legislation that we have, the Digital Services Act, that we're going to be saying we want you to build in privacy by design, but also build in responsibility by design. You don't just adjust the algorithms according to how much more time people will spend on the platform, but also looking at, well, what will the consequence be?
So one of the big things on my mind all the time, how much is this a question of technology? How much is this a question of media communication? What are the ratios? And how does legislation interfere there? Christian, where does legislation actually have an entry point to make a change in this media sphere?
I think we messed it up in the early 2000s. Basically, their American policy was setting the tune, and that was a laissez-faire mentality. I mean, if you read the papers from the Commission in the early 2000s, they thought it's something like a telephone company or something like that. I mean, we really messed it up. We didn't understand the technology because, I mean, let's be honest, I mean, more or less all forms of classical media have a commercial aspect. Even public television does advertisement. The commercial logic is much more brutal, driven by algorithms, because you get the news you're interested in. We try to adopt politically by the Media Act. We try to adopt a little bit by the European Media Freedom Act, but still, I mean, it's out of hand. It's literally out of hand. And it has a commercial dimension which is uncomparable to conventional media. But we haven't got an idea how to regulate that so far, if you're honest.
The unit of content that you get in a newspaper, you know, as like a textbook example, that has a certain proportion of a number of genres complementing each other. And we don't have to be foolish and believe that everybody reads the full newspaper, but these things are side by side. And I think, just on a very pedestrian level, a gigantic difference is that the item of content that you get digitally is usually one individual piece that is desperately trying to hold, or whose platform is desperately trying to hold on to you. But then it drives a certain type of engagement, and engagement in this digital sense, basically not letting you go from the screen, is the measurement of success. And I find that very problematic as a media professional, to have to cater to or have to encourage people to engage in a behavior that I know is not good for them.
You have a newspaper that has a website, and the way that they produce the same article that they will have in the paper or the e-version of their newspaper, they will split it up. They will give one part of the article in the morning, then a couple of hours another part of the article, and in the afternoon a third part. It's not enough that you sit with your coffee in the morning and read the paper, and then you put it away, and then you read the next paper in the next morning. They want you to log in to their website multiple times a day. So it's not just that you have the traditional media and you have the online platforms, but you also have the digitization of traditional media, even public service media.
What I sense is that there's an arms race trying to grab more and more of this attention, and quality journalism on any side and within any genre, because journalism is not just news and journalism is not just information, is on the losing end in terms of basically being driven out in this arms race by big tech, which is a very heavily concentrated power. I would like to come to you, Alice, because you don't believe that we actually have a proper European public sphere to begin with, right? You have quite severe criticism about how connected the European public spheres are.
You know, most people read the news in their own language. They are mostly reading about their national politics and news, or especially the politics, I would say. When they read or watch news about what's happening elsewhere, it's mostly in their own language. And there's perhaps a few exceptions who try to cover more on what's happening in Brussels and at the European level. And the people that they have based in Brussels, it's completely different skills. And then they are surprised when, when people don't understand how Brussels or how Europe functions.
There was this sort of weird, almost jocular expectation in the 2000s when I started in late 2000s as a journalist that, in a few years, a journalist is going to do everything. What it resulted in, with, again, technology becoming more and more available and driving expectations up, is much more punishing working circumstances and environments, and much less livable a career path. I know I'm a Hungarian journalist complaining here about journalism being a hard job. So journalism is much more a mission than a business at this point. Would a stronger business aspect help, or do you think it's fine to remove the business from it and we can replace that with something that sustains journalism then?
An important move would be to, first of all, to return to contextual advertising. Because if your business model is the targeted advertising, which basically is spying on people online, you need to take a hard look in the mirror and wondering what on earth you are doing. And I know that even, yes, conventional media have become too dependent on this, posting and spreading their news via the digital platforms. And because the digital platforms work with targeted advertising, they've become dependent on it too. Make it mandatory to go back to contextual advertising. I think that would be one good move. Another one would be to create a not-for-profit European public service alternative.
That's very interesting. But of course, when you mention the public service model, it pops to my mind that it was conceived specifically for electronic media, conventional electronic media. So radio and television is what we're talking about primarily. One of the main functions of public service broadcast originally was conceived as a balancing agent, right? Not substituting, but balancing a media sphere. And here, I think, in a digital sphere, it's a very important question. How do you balance reach? Because we may be able to provide quality content. European public broadcasters are providing quality content available freely on the internet, but their reach to the audience or their sort of prevalence in what's easy to access is much lower. Basically what I'm asking is there a baseball bat to break up big tech with? Or we're Europeans, we don't use baseball bats, we use rolling pins, right?
Within the European democracies, there had been a political domination, even manipulation of national media, conventional media schemes. Either commercial concentration or using commercial concentration politically. For the first time we see simply that, for example, information coming from other European countries are squeezed because foreign correspondents are expensive. That had been for commercial reason. But we all of a sudden saw that even reporting in an objective way what is the sense of thoughts in other democracies is restricted. So this very limited perception of the national context of societal debate or general political debate is very problematic for national democracies, but also for the European democracy. And then we have a second aspect which is somehow accelerating all that, and that's the social media. And there we would have to differentiate that social media and algorithms work neurologically. They address the emotional side.
Yes.
It works that you want to be reassured about what you like to think anyway. And more, it's not even that you just get the limited news, which is somehow related to what you believe anyway. It is also that you don't even need the news anymore.
You're very right that algorithms are designed to trigger our emotions. But not just the algorithms are designed in such a way. Propaganda also is. And this is... So actually the foreign interference in our democracies and the technological threats to our democracy. They are interconnected and they're reinforcing each other. And I would even ask, like, how much more democracies are we prepared to offer on the altar of big tech? Because big tech is the enabler of foreign interference.
I feel like the balance and integration of information with opinion is skewed in a way, because for a while the journalistic sort of gold standard was to completely separate the two, which is of course not very possible. And breaking this barrier has been an incredible success for propagandists, for instance, or those who want to abuse the looks of or sort of the performance of news. And it's no wonder that a bunch of outlets, just to mention a few, Fox News calls itself news, which it really isn't in a sense. But I wonder, Karen, when you say that we have to focus very strongly on sort of, let's say, physical, actual, present communities, but it then poses the question, how do we form these communities and yet not isolate from each other within Europe?
Many of the people that I know today are people that I have known for the last 10, 15 years because of online platforms. But at that point, I could choose who I wanted to see information from. I would seek out people that I knew were knowledgeable about a subject that interested me. Nerdy subjects such as European politics and what's happening in Brussels and the Parliament and the Commission and Council. We need to allow for this public sphere about isolated subjects and combine it with having a general public discussion about where our society, our city, our municipality is going, where we talk about the same things. And for me, it's the mechanisms of how you sell this information that we need to look at, not just what the information is. Because I think there is a lot of good information out there. But people have too much going on in their lives. It's a full job to be informed, but most people have other full jobs in their lives. They have their family, they have a salary that they need to make, and being informed is not something that is their life mission. And that's why when you have public service media, TV channels, they have the news and you have the weather, you have sports, and you have entertainment before the news and after the news, so that people will turn on the TV and watch a bit of news. You can't just do boring political stuff, because we are a very small percentage of the population that take an interest in this. And we need to make sure that people are informed and are not manipulated. That's very different from trying to capture somebody's attention for 30 seconds online.
You would seek out people with the relevant and informed opinions. Now, this is a very elite sphere of the public sphere. You also admitted to this, or you also pointed this out. And the fact that we are also speaking in English, the language of the one country that didn't want to be in the EU, and look how well it worked out for them. Although this show is subtitled in 15 languages, so look for them somewhere on the screen, please. I don't know where the button is right now. But there is a strong and very important language barrier in Europe. There is a huge disproportion on foreign language knowledge and learning, which of course correlates with class. Can we consider the European language barrier and solutions to overcome this European language barrier when we are brainstorming about the potential development of a European public sphere?
The online platforms and who you reached is not necessarily class-based or just for the elites. Because I don't have a driver's license, I'm from Copenhagen, where bikes are predominant.
Oh, me neither.
I took a cab outside of Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark. And I was talking to the driver, and we found out that he had been following me on Twitter for a number of years.
That's nice.
Because he was very interested in the Premier League in the UK. And a lot of information about the Premier League was on Twitter, and so he came across me and started following me. So a center-left liberal politician from Copenhagen, who was a diplomat at the time, was connected and shared the same information space with a cab driver from Eastern Jutland. But for me, the important thing is that we need to have empowerment of the citizens to choose the information and have some control, so that they're not just being fed stuff. And another thing I think is also important is we need to have more people-to-people exchanges in order to actually understand each other and understand the different cultures and the different histories of Europe and languages. Then we need to actually physically meet each other, and I think we need to invest in this.
It's really important that we put down our smartphones more often and that we keep meeting and exchanging offline with each other, because I seriously think that especially perhaps the younger generation has either lost or not even developed some of the social skills that we had.
As people have less and less free time, in that sense, available free time that's not eaten up by some kind of perceived necessity. You are a native speaker of a language that is bigger than ours three, Danish, Dutch, and Hungarian combined. So let me ask you, what do we do about the language barrier? And not just because I never managed to learn German properly, which I'm ashamed of, but also upset by.
You can argue whether it's more a throat disease or a language, but
Come on.
What I'm saying is, I mean, looking back a little bit, and that's a privilege of my grey hair, very much related to the European idea was that almost forgotten idea that we would have a European language, Esperanto.
Yes.
And if you now look to the new potentials of technology, I mean, not all is devastating. I mean, it's a question in what context you probably put it. The hidden dimension of having a European media space based on an online translation of media content is that we train AI to have an equivalent potential related to the dominance of the big Anglo-Saxon, let's say, cultural world, because there is no commercial interest to train AIs in Hungarian.
I'm sold. I'm very enthusiastic. All my love to my Estonian and Finnish language sisters. But who owns this? And we don't have to very specifically answer this, but of course the problem with all of these infrastructure, including large language models, is who owns this, who capitalizes on this, as you say, because there's commercial interest involved. Who makes sure that these actually serve the public? So let's go a quick round and think about how does Europe make its players competitive in this field? Or is it actually competition that we need?
I think we need to acknowledge that a lot of media journalism, news, culture doesn't actually have a business model. And therefore we need to support it, and we need to acknowledge that it cannot survive without some form of public support. So we need to help the copyright holders, the journalists, the media, the film industry to make sure that we have good quality content. We cannot just have big tech going out and stealing the content, but we cannot, I think, viably develop large language models for each language and culture that we have in the EU. So we need to find a way of making sure that we have good quality content available to train the algorithms on, so that we have artificial intelligence that understands Estonian or Danish or German.
So basically forcing the commercial players to do this job in a more equitable way?
We have brilliant European encyclopedias that are now also online. They are being pushed down in the search engines because they're giving priority for example, Wikipedia. Both serve a function, but I think that the encyclopedias are more scientifically well written and in the different European languages and cultures, and therefore have a big value for the artificial intelligence to be trained on and for our schools and our general public to have access to. So we need to make sure that this is findable, and we need to make sure that our different member states don't say, oh well, as long as we understand English, then everything is fine. When I was trying to communicate with people that didn't speak English, then it didn't help me.
So Christian, you also mentioned preserving cultures locally, nationally. This is a crucial question. This is supposedly the mission, as part of a public mission. What should be Europe's and the EU's specific investment be in this field?
We have the potential to set up a European streaming platform for national news accessible in all languages. And it should be a public good. And there would be yearly costs, I mean, could be between 40 and 50 million. This is nothing, to be honest, if you look to the European budget. And it has two dimensions. It's access to information. It is access not depending on privileges, elitist information. It is simply based on AI, and you get it translated in your language, and you're not depending completely on the silo of your national media. I think it's groundbreaking. It's not an isolated project. I mean, what we are setting up, even now quite practically in the framework program, is that we have a cloud for all the European museums and archives where we wouldn't like to leave the digitalizations to the Google of the world because they want our content. These are steps in the right direction, and that should be public goods, and we have any right to do because we pay it with the taxpayers' money. We should be able to say there is public interest, there are some moral values, there is cultural preservation needs. That is just a matter of political will.
I really like this idea. I think this is not exactly the same, but complemented by what Display Europe is trying to do on the level of community and local media. One tiny but important criticism, I think we also need a pan-European sitcom, which I have a pitch for already, so I'll send you. I think it has to play out in Favoritenstraße with all my Gastarbeiter neighbors. It's going to be so much fun. So let me come to you, Alice. Judge our members of parliament and their input. What is missing? What would you amend this by? What kind of connects an idea to balance this public sphere?
There's a lot of talk these days about critical infrastructure, and communication is also critical infrastructure. It's a utility for the public good, which is very important, not just for the conventional news, but also for the digital news and the way that we build and preserve our social cohesion in a European space.
So let's not leave journalism to the wolves of the market, if I understand you correctly.
Exactly, yes.
One closing remark, and thank you all so much for coming. Please, let's not only focus on large-scale legacy media, because if this wider ecosystem of smaller subgenre local journalism goes extinct, nobody is going to channel anything into legacy media anymore. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll be looking forward to your legislative initiatives.
Thank you.
Te mit gondolsz a digitalizációról? Áldás vagy átok? Van rajta kikapcsoló gomb? Vagy nem érdekel, ha az összes adatodat is ellopják? Oszd meg velünk a véleményedet odalent kommentben, és hogyha te is üzennél Rogán Antalnak a megfigyeléssel kapcsolatban, akkor nyomj egy lájkot és iratkozz fel a csatornánkra. Küld el ezt a műsort az összes nagynénédnek, és kérd meg, hogy küldjék tovább a bácsikáidnak, és ha van kedved, támogass minket a patreon.com/eurozine oldalon. Ez a műsor az Eurozine produkciója. Ha még nem hallottál az Eurozinről, akkor pedig spuri, azonnal nézd meg a weboldalunkat, mert ez egy remek online magazin, ami ráadásul hiányterméket árul, méghozzá ingyen. Minőségi, lassú újságírást mindarról, amiről érdemes az embernek gondolkodni. Európa szerte 100-nál is több partnerlapot szemlézünk és fordítunk angolra, illetve a saját tartalmainkkal mutatjuk az utat a digitális zajban. Visszatérő nézőknek feltűnhetett, hogy na mi van? Végre egyszer tisztességesen ki van sminkelve a paprika. Hát ez nem teljesen véletlen, ugyanis Prokop Kata, a Sminkakadémia alapítója megjelent itt az otthonomban, és hála az Istennek rajzolt nekem emberarcot. Ta-da! Kata sminkmesterként dolgozik, és a Sminkakadémiában oktat is, hétköznapi mezitlábas felhasználókat arra, hogy hogyan sminkeljék magukat, és leendő sminkmestereket keressétek fel a weboldalát, nagyon köszönjük, Kata. A műsorunk mozgatórugója a Display Europe. Ez egy új tartalommegosztó platform, amely 15 különböző nyelven kínál cikkeket, podcastokat, videókat európai politikáról, kultúráról, meg közösségekről, és még csak nem is él vissza a felhasználói adataiddal. Hihetetlen, nem? De igaz. displayeurope.eu. Ez a talkshow az Európai Unió Kreatív Európa programja és az Európai Kulturális Alapítvány társfinanszírozásával készül. Fontos, hogy az itt kifejtett nézetek és vélemények csak a megszólalók és a szerzőké, és nem feltétlenül tükrözik az Európai Unió vagy az Európai Oktatás és Kulturális Végrehajtó Ügynökség véleményét. Sem az Európai Unió, sem az EACEA nem tehető felelőssé értük, de szó se róla, nem bánjuk, ha véletlenül megfogadják a tanácsainkat. Nagyon köszönjük az Európa Parlament brüsszeli stúdiójának, hogy vendégül látott minket.